Hi, I'm Gary Jacobs of FIT TV, filling in for your host, Chris DiMaggio. All of us in life go through difficult times, difficult things, some worse than others, some have it easier than others. Somebody told me years ago, when you go through something difficult, instead of just looking at the bad things, you have to find the silver lining in everything. And I thought about it, you know what, she was right. One of the silver linings that I found in the difficult times that I went through was meeting our next guest, Maureen Rossi. Maureen Rossi is the chairwoman of Kings Park in the Know, and we're here today to talk about a very serious subject, the heroin epidemic here on Long Island. Welcome, Maureen, to the show.
Gary, thank you so much for having me. Yes, we met in a very unusual way, but it was kismet.
That's right. So tell me, first of all, what is Kings Park in the Know? Then we'll get to the heroin problem.
Absolutely. Kings Park in the Know is a 10-year-old nonprofit that was started up in response to the island's youth opiate and heroin epidemic. We started in 2005. At the same time, the COMEC Northport, the Northport East Northport Coalition started. So we were the two nonprofits that started up in response to this youth epidemic. But at the time, it was Long Island's dirty little secret. No one was writing about it. No one was speaking about it. But, you know, I was asked to join this committee, and as a reporter, that's what I do for a living. The reason I knew it was bigger than what they were saying, I followed two things. I followed the crime, and I saw how much it went up, house robberies in nice neighborhoods where there had been none before, and I followed the obituaries. Young people dying quietly on tree-lined streets, week after week, all over Long Island. As a reporter, had I not been a reporter, I probably would have not realized the scope of the problem we were looking at.
Right, but you read about these stories all the time, and we all see obituaries, and you know, I hate to say it, but sometimes it's just a name, and you look at the age, and you say, my God, that's just such a tragedy. So, but yeah. What is it that made you get involved in this issue? I mean, there's so many issues you're involved in, and there's so many other tragedies going on. What made you, right now, a lot of people are involved because it touches so many families.
Right.
But what made you start getting involved in this, in forming Kings Park in the Know, before it really became an epidemic?
I was one of the founding members. I was asked to partake as I was a child advocate and have been for the last 25 years. I've championed gun control and education reform, and I ran countless seminars on how to keep your children safe from sexual predators, behind the wheel, your new driver. So I was already a child advocate. I wrote for child parent magazines for years. So I was connected on many levels, and I was kind of asked to do this. Okay. And I just simply found it unacceptable that children in my community were dying from heroin. It was unacceptable to me.
Now, I've been to some of the events that you did, and a lot of the parents of these children who passed away due to heroin overdoses, and their stories are just horrific and tragic, and you live it on a daily and weekly basis because I know you've become friends with them, and they call you. How do you keep from not getting just depressed about listening to all these people? I mean, it's when I listen to it just, you know, occasionally, once a week, every month, my heart just goes out, and I think about it all the time. You know, you don't even know what to say to these. I don't say anything because you don't know what to say. You know, how do you deal with dealing with these parents that are just grieving and something they'll never get over?
Right. You made a very good point in saying that how I've become friends with so many. When we began 10 years ago, it was really just me hanging out with all the experts in the field, the addiction experts, the prevention experts. I went to hundreds upon hundreds of hours of meetings. I was on many boards where I learned from the best and the brightest. In the beginning, the parents weren't coming out. There was shame.
Right.
The Chiappas of Massapequa were the first family to come out and say, hey, this is what happened to our daughter. She was a cheerleader. She was straight A. What's going on here, you know? And then the second family to come out, and I'll never forget this, is Terry Kroll from Massapequa. Timmy, straight A student, had terrible headaches, was prescribed into his addiction, like so many young people. And before you knew it, I used to have to constantly go on TV to beg politicians and beg people, anyone who would listen. But the parents started to come out one by one by one. And now there are throngs of parents.
Well, our generation, when you heard heroin, you picture the bum on the street, and
Right.
in the poor communities. I mean, heroin was just such a horrible word. I never knew anybody who would even think about doing heroin. So
Yeah, it was communities of color. It was lower socioeconomic people. You would never equate middle to upper middle class white teens and young adults with doing it. And there's a reason for that. But I'll first get back to your question. I've become friends with these people by lobbying for legislation, which we could talk about later. And you sit on a bus ride for hours and you sit at meetings with these people, and they become some of the best friends I've ever had in my life. How do I keep from being sad? Well, I'm a very, very happy-go-lucky person, but I would be lying if I did not say that these children haunt me every night, that we lost 2,000 children in a decade in Nassau and Suffolk. That doesn't account for those who are incarcerated. It doesn't account for those who are the walking dead, who will never be the same. So I would be lying if I said that, it does not eat me.
Right.
I am blessed beyond measure. And the fun thing about these parents, you wouldn't think that we get together, we do laugh, we cry, we laugh, we have social gatherings. 1 minute a dad's talking to another dad and they're laughing about their first Little League game with their deceased sons. Mm-hmm. The next minute, two moms are talking about their daughters and they're weeping. I am sad. It is the greatest, it will go down as the greatest health crisis of our time. It was uncalled for, and it all leads back to Washington.
All right.
And I can explain that.
Well, let's get to the beginning. How did this begin? I mean, like we said beginning, it was in poor communities, and you picture people with needles in their arms, and, for us, when we grew up, if you went out and drank some alcohol and maybe smoked a joint, that was the bad thing.
That was the bad.
How did this go from people smoking joints once in a while and drinking some vodka and getting sick? How did it turn into an epidemic where heroin's become, I don't know if the word acceptable, but the kids today, they grow up, it's just all over the place.
Yeah. Let me tell you something. The fifth vital sign was the beginning of the end. Vital signs, I'm not a nurse, I'm not in the medical profession, but, basically you go into an ER, you go to a doctor, they take your blood pressure, your blood ox, whatever. There are certain things they ask you, and those are called vital signs. They're quantifiable. They're measurable things to tell a doctor a little bit more about your health situation. Well, somewhere around 2000, maybe it was 2001, pain, which is unquantifiable. Right. How do you measure pain? It's different for everybody. It's actually interpreted by the human nervous system, which is different for everyone. You could have 2 teeth pulled. You could go back to work in an hour with a Tylenol.
Not me.
Okay. With the Tylenol.
Right.
I could have 2 teeth pulled. I could need 3 days of Vicodin and bed rest.
Right.
The fifth vital sign being pain was the very beginning of the end. And Big Pharma, which is the pharmaceutical industry, very powerful lobbyist, very wealthy industry, hopped right on to that fifth vital sign, and that was the beginning and the end. Suburban shelves were lined with Oxycontin and Vicodin and Percocet. And one time I was being interviewed by Newsday, which was it's really weird being interviewed when you've spent 21 years interviewing people. Right. And I've even written for Newsday. And they said, Maureen, why in the wealthier neighborhoods? Why? Black kids are not doing this. There's no heroin in Wyandanch and neighborhoods of color on Long Island. None. Wow. None. Unless it's a much older, just someone who started way back, inner city and happened to relocate. Because where there's money, there's more access to health care. Where there's more access to health care, there's more access to pharmaceuticals.
So direct correlation.
Fifth vital sign, areas where there's money, more, Parents weren't locking up their meds. Grandparents weren't locking up their meds. But we've accomplished a lot in 10 years, Not a good enough answer for the parents of the deceased. When we get excited that we passed another law and another law has made a difference, it doesn't bring these kids back. And these kids were at the prime of their life. Mm. Prime. I mean, we've lost half as many kids as we've lost in Afghanistan and Iraq to this epidemic.
Unbelievable. What's being done? I mean, I want to get into what needs to be done, but first of all, what is being done now to try to stop the epidemic?
Okay,
and
so much, proudly, so much has been done. There's been this team of amazing people, from like LICAD, the Prevention and Addiction Treatment, Seafield and Pedersen Craig, and there's just this gaggle of people who will not quit. Richard Buckman and Pam Mitzi and Anthony Rizzuto and Claudia Ragney, the best and brightest minds in the industry. They said, no way, this is not enough. Together we've been passing some critical bills. One of the first bills, sadly, did not do enough for one family in Comac in the fall. It's called the Good Sam Law. We passed that in 2011. It's called the Good Samaritan Law. So in other words, if someone calls for help for someone who's overdosing or in medical trouble and they have paraphernalia or drugs, they will not be held legally culpable. We had this in Kings Park. A star football player was overdosing on heroin. His friends dragged him out to the front lawn and called the cops. They didn't want to be legally held culpable. Right. We passed this law. It took a lot to pass this law. A lot of lobbying, talking to anyone who would listen. In Comac, a kid was high on 20. He had just turned 20 a few days before. Greatest family you ever want to meet. He was high on heroin. He was overdosing. His friends panicked. He was in a park. They left him. Oh. You want to know why? Because in Suffolk County, nobody knows about the Good Sam Law. In Nassau County, it's on the sides of buses. It's on billboards. It's really the tale of two counties with this epidemic in many, many ways. We had our first bi-county opiate summit this fall, right, where we had brought all the stakeholders from both counties. But it really is a tale of two counties. I won't lie there. Right.
Now, you mentioned all these talk and the lobby is, and one of the things that really bothers me, I said enough with the damn talking already. I mean, talking is great. Do you think that, we talk about education, for example.
Yeah.
Do you think you can educate this epidemic to go away?
Yes, I do. Look.
Explain, because we're talking about education in school, but that doesn't seem to be stopping it.
Okay. Well, first of all, here you want to know what? This was a perfect storm. This did not happen by accident to this generation, which are called Millennials, by the way. Right. I'm a baby boomer. Anybody from 46 to 64. I'm at the very end of 64. I'm a baby boomer. You're a Gen Xer.
Right.
And then there's Gen Ys. Now this generation is called Millennials. What happened with the Millennials, it was a perfect storm. They were children of parents who were, not that ambivalent about a little weed, a little alcohol. Well,
we grew up with it, we're fine.
I did at that age. I'm CEO of a company.
The president smoked pot, and
right,
they've done drugs.
So you have this parental attitude. Well, you know what? I had Boone's Farm strawberry wine in 10th grade, and I'm a physician's assistant. I turned out okay. So you had this paradigm, this thought process by a generation of parents who was like, gateway drugs, what do you do? Kids will be kids. Then you had the medicine cabinets full, thanks to Big Pharma and thanks to the fifth vital sign. And then you had the last thing, no prevention programs in school districts. On Long Island, DARE went away. DARE was proven to be, it was not evidence-based. It was not proven to be effective. And away went DARE, and that was it. A generation without prevention programs.
I mean, I understand education is a part of it, but one of the things I do remember growing up was a talk that I went to, and they were talking about cocaine. And they said, look, if you do cocaine, 1 in 5 people will do it once and they'll become addicted. And you don't know if that's going to be you. And that scared the hell out of me.
Right.
I said, you know what? I don't want to be that one person that tries it once. And you know what? That stuck in my head.
Sure.
But it just seems like this is greater than education. But I'm glad
right.
you think that education is part of it.
Yes.
Now, what about law enforcement? Can we, if we say, you know what, tomorrow the legislation says, you know what, we're going to dump all the money into law enforcement and do whatever we can we stop it with money and law enforcement?
We can't. One of the biggest things we've done, and I just have to skip back to legislation, was the I-STOP bill. And we are the first state, New York State, Suffolk County is the first for a lot of things. Getting their personnel trained in Narcan. We'll talk about Narcan later. Not a panacea. Miracle drug, not a panacea. So we passed a bill. Now they said, oh, you'll never pass iStop. That's the big, that's the medical association. They're too powerful.
Too powerful, right.
Well, guess what? There's a 24/7 database tracking opiates and certain other drugs that connects pharmacists and doctors. Now, here's what happened. We predicted it would put a halting stop to opiates. Doctor shopping.
Right.
Doctor shopping. Go to Dr. A on Monday looking for perks. Go Dr. B on Wednesday and you get Vikes.
Right.
The doctors had no clue who was giving out what.
Right.
This has put a halting stop to it. Unfortunately,
But did that backfire? Because
we predicted that there would be an uptick in heroin use because anyone who was addicted to pills would now have no choice whatsoever but to go to the heroin, which is cheaper than a pack of cigarettes.
Right.
It's so pure, it's 40% purer than the stuff from the 70s, so you're able to snort it. So not only now do we have this little influx of heroin use, we have people who would have never dreamed of using heroin. The 46-year-old housewife, soccer mom, who's got the Gucci bag, who was, addicted to Vicodins, who can't get her hands on bikes anymore,
right.
is snorting H.
Right.
So there was it'll be temporary, but we predicted this uptick. Law enforcement, I feel personally, is doing an outstanding job. Unfortunately, you know how government works. You have the sheriff's department, they're doing a great job. They're handing out a lot of free drug testing kits, which is great. You have, Suffolk County PD, historic heroin bust. They're doing an amazing job. Sadly, although I know he cares, our county executive cares deeply. He's a dad.
You cannot not
how
care.
do you not care?
Right.
He's a dad. He's a good man. However, I'm saddened at how late to the game he's come. He was elected at a time, at the peak of the greatest health crisis of our time, and he just this year is rolling out some things.
Right.
So I would be remiss if I didn't say I wasn't disappointed in that. Once again, tale of two counties. 76 school districts in Nassau were trained in Too Good for Drugs, evidence-based prevention program. How many were trained in Suffolk? 10.
Maybe it's that they don't want to admit that there is a problem here, because a lot of people, until it happens to you, it doesn't hit home.
No.
And you say it's the other kid, it's, the parents did something wrong, or the kid was troubled, but now it's happened. You see,
Common Core screwed everything up
everybody.
because the PTAs would have been up in arms. School districts would have been welcoming it, but Common Core kind of fudged everything up. And parents have that, why not my kid?
Of course, right.
When I was raising my kids, they're 25 and 23 now, out of the house, I said, why not my kid? You know what? The parents I have met of all these children who have passed are some of the finest human beings I've ever met in my life.
Right.
Maureen, we went to church, a synagogue. I coached his Little League team. I was her class mother 9 times. We ate like a family. We went camping and fishing. Finest people you will ever know. These kids, captain of this, head of this, AP classes. This is, when I say a horse of another color, this is like nothing we've ever seen.
Let me just to go back a little bit. Where does the heroin come from?
Okay.
Does it come from other countries?
Most
Are they
of
making
the
it? Where is it coming from?
Most of the heroin that comes to Long Island does come from Mexico. The most opium being produced is being produced in Afghanistan.
Really?
The drug lords now, the money from the drug lords now funds Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups.
But you said law enforcement, why can't we just stop, on the federal level, stop them from coming in? I mean, if we cut it off, stop the flow. If you don't have it, you can't use it.
Now you're talking immigration.
Right. Well, it's a little bit. We have to secure the borders.
We have to
anyway, but there's another reason to secure the borders.
This is, and not a lot of it's coming from the Middle East, I'm not going to lie. Most of it is coming from Mexico. It's very pure. Here's something very dangerous. It's being sprayed, so if a kid overdoses on something that's been tainted, Narcan will not bring them back to life.
Wow. We're starting to get closer to the end. We have so much to talk about, but one of the issues I always see legislators, it is a hot button issue. And when somebody's on the news that they lost their child, the legislators get out and they talk and they have meetings and it's great. And I know some of them mean well, but I get back to before with legislation. I just say enough already. Stop with the damn meetings and start doing something about it. This has to be a #1 priority when it comes to spending money. if you save one life, we could save so many
Yeah.
lives. I personally don't feel like enough is being done. And,
Right.
and I know there's a movement now towards doing more, but how long do you have to wait?
Yeah, there's
Every
a
week
huge
another
movement.
person can die.
Another week, we lost 2 this week.
I mean,
2
so
this week.
You can't wait another
We
week. You
lost
can't
a-
wait a day.
We lost a 14-year-old in Lindenhurst, heroin. Over the summer, we lost a lot of girls a lot of girls, and one mother killed herself 2 days later. She couldn't take the grief. Tom Silmy has done something, which I'm not a Republican or anything, and I'm not political. He started a task force to look at the money and how are we spending it? How is the money, the millions and millions and millions that we spend on Long Island to combat this, is it being spent in the right area? Right. And he got up and he said probably one of the most important things I've ever heard. Not one legislative issue is more important than this. We're talking about human lives. Right. We're talking about kids.
Right. There's nothing more important
There's
than that.
nothing more important than prevention, prevention, prevention.
Right.
We need evidence-based prevention programs in schools K through 12. We left something on the table in Albany when we passed ISTOP. The other half of ISTOP, biennial education of doctors about opiates. So many kids were prescribed into their addiction. We left it on the table. We're going back.
We've got to stop them from getting on it, because I think the problem with the heroin is once they're on it, it's very hard to get off.
We're going back to get it. We're going back, and the doctors are going to have to get trained in opiates and get more familiar with it. And one more thing, they have to get trained in post-Narcan resuscitation. Kids are being brought back to life more than ever since the history of heroin. Not all these kids are living. They're being pumped with Narcan, coming back to life, going to the hospital. Doctors have no clue.
But to me, Maureen, that's a no-brainer. I mean, I don't want to end the show without talking about Narcan, but isn't that a no-brainer? Shouldn't every school, every policeman, every first responder, it should be everywhere. We were talking about defibrillators all over the place.
Narcan.
Shouldn't Narcan, that's a simple thing. It's not very expensive, and it saves lives every day.
But it's a missed opportunity, Gary. The doctors go, oh, okay, you had Narcan, out the door you go. They need follow-up treatment. No, there's no post-Narcan resuscitation follow-up treatment, and that's our next big get legislatively.
You mentioned earlier in the show about marijuana, how we all smoked, but we all knew that, we always thought that was a gateway drug.
Right.
Now they're talking about legalizing marijuana. Do you see a correlation between the acceptance of marijuana and legalizing it, that kids say, you know what, drugs are okay? And is it a gateway drug to possibly heroin?
I think it's very confusing for the millennials who are very engaged in social media, in media, to see that it's being legalized in, like, I think it's a couple of states. I don't even know which ones it is. I think it's Washington State and Colorado and medically Jersey and Cali. I think that's very confusing to them. I think we're really sending a conflicting message. Right. Do I think it can help people? Yes. Do I think what Governor Cuomo did is right? Yes. He made it legal in the non-smokable form. Right. And I believe, I could be wrong, I believe they take out what gets you high.
So you just
and just leave what takes away the pain, which is beneficial. Burn victims, cancer victims. So for me personally, I don't have a problem with medical marijuana.
But recreational?
I don't. We have enough drunk people driving on the road. We don't need high people driving on the road. Thank you.
We're down to less than 5 minutes, so I'm going to go through a couple of things that I've thought about the issue, because this is something that I'm concerned with also. And just give me a 2-minute answer on each one. Less than 2 minutes, because down to the end. What do you think about putting drug-sniffing dogs in the schools on a regular basis to catch these kids early on to find out if they're doing heroin?
There's not a lot of heroin in the high schools. There's a very little bit.
Really?
You'd catch the marijuana. It would be great, because then the red flag goes up and the kid gets a little therapy. Right. You ring the bell for the parents. Hello, we have a problem, on the horizon.
Right. What about doing more searches? I know everyone's worried about invading privacy, and I am too. I don't want my privacy invaded, but to me this is more important than that. They're children, they're minors, and we're responsible for them.
More important than dogs that sniff lockers in high school is the opiates pills being flown up from Mexico on websites. Kids are ordering. Okay, we passed the iStop bill that took most of the pills off the street, but Gary, they open and close websites every single day where you can buy them online.
Right. What about one of the things that bothers me? They arrest kids in school all the time, and they find people and they hand them back their cell phone when they're done. to me, there should be a law that if you arrest a child or you catch a child doing drugs, you take away their cell phone and you go through it.
Absolutely.
And you find out everybody who they text and they message. So their parents, not because you want to put them in jail, but because you want to warn those other parents who probably have no idea.
You better believe it. You could save so many lives that way. So many lives.
I believe that. With my heart,
we have to do everything. It's counterintuitive not to do that.
Right.
We have to do everything we can to save lives. We've lost too many. One was too many.
Absolutely. What are the signs for people who are watching this and saying, you know what, this is horrific and it's sad, but my child would never do this. Still, you know, they're a typical teenager. They're not sleeping. What are some signs?
Okay, of
that we can
opiate
point
abuse,
out?
heroin and pills, whatever. It's very hard because adolescents are moody. They are sleepy, especially your high-performing ones. You're captain of the football team. You're taking 2 AP classes. You're in band after school. Our kids have itineraries. Our kids have 14. They have 14-hour days. We didn't have 4. Who carried an itinerary? Right. So, like the Chiapas of Massapequa said, when of course she was like tired at the dinner table, you know.
So how do you know?
How do you know? If you have suspicions, check the room. Spoons,
search the back,
spoons.
Search their
drug test them. If you have suspicions, you're their parent, not their friend. Right. Drug test them. Drug tests are free. If you have suspicions, drug test them. Spoons. If you find any needles.
And what
lighters. A lot of lighters.
And we'll put the information on the bottom of the screen, but tell me, what do you do if you suspect it or your child goes to bed or goes to school, you search their drawer and you find heroin bottles or paraphernalia? What do you do? Because I think people are afraid to call the police.
Yep.
You don't want your child going to jail. What do you do?
CombatHeroin.com or .org. The governor put it up. CombatHeroin.com.
That should be the first place they go to?
.org is where they should go to. You can hear from Long Island's own Linda Ventura, who lost her son Tommy. And they have advice for parents, kids, teens, everyone.
Great, and we'll put that number on the bottom of the screen. Again, thank you for coming today, Maureen. We have a lot more that we didn't go through, and it's just such an important topic, so we'll have to have you come back. But thank you for
having me.
I need a hug. You're saving kids' lives.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you.
Gary Jacobs filling in for Chris DiMaggio with FIT TV. Join us every week where we combat all these important issues here on Long Island. And again, if you suspect that your child is doing drugs and doing heroin, don't wait. There's no harm in trying to find out if they're on. But sitting back and doing nothing could have devastating results. Thank you very much.